Subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories. Don't forget to hit that like button. This story contains themes of betrayal, regret, and the challenging journey of redemption. Reader discretion is advised. "I swear you'll never see me again," Sarah screamed, her voice raw with fury as she signed the divorce papers. Mark smirked, a cold, dismissive look in his eyes. Perfect. One less woman to worry about. 3 years later, he walked into the city's most exclusive restaurant, and what he saw froze him to his core, forever changing his world. The sleek black Aston Martin Vantage glided to a silent halt in front of the Obsidian Table, the most exclusive and outrageously expensive restaurant in all of New York City. Mark Sterling adjusted his platinum Rolex as the valet rushed to take his keys. At 42, he was the living embodiment of corporate success. Owner of the nation's largest luxury hotel chain, with a fortune exceeding $300 million and a reputation that preceded him in every elite circle. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling," the valet greeted with an almost exaggerated bow. "It's an honor to have you back at our establishment." Mark nodded, that cold, calculated smile he had perfected over years of ruthless negotiations fixed on his face. His bespoke Tom Ford suit, worth $15,000, fit his athletic physique perfectly, maintained thanks to a personal trainer who cost him more per month than most people's annual salaries. Every step he took resonated with the authority of a man who had never known the meaning of the word no. Tonight was special. He had just closed the most significant deal of his career, the acquisition of a rival chain that would give him a complete monopoly on luxury tourism across 3 countries. It was time to celebrate, and he had invited Chloe Davies, the 28-year-old supermodel he had met at a charity gala the previous week. A beautiful, sophisticated woman, and above all, impressed by his wealth. The interior of the Obsidian Table was a spectacle of opulence. Custom-made crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow on the polished marble floors. The walls were adorned with original art from European masters, and each table was dressed with fresh flowers flown in daily from Holland. The prices were so exclusive that a single dinner could cost more than the monthly salary of 3 average families. "Mr. Sterling," the maitre d' approached with a subservient smile. "Your usual table is ready. Are we expecting anyone else tonight?" "Yes, Ms. Davies will be arriving any moment. Make sure everything is perfect," Mark replied, his voice authoritative, honed by years of commanding hundreds of employees. As he was escorted to his table in the VIP area, Mark felt on top of the world. 3 years had passed since his divorce, 3 years during which he had multiplied his fortune. He had dated the most beautiful women on the continent and achieved everything he had set out to do. Sarah had been just a temporary obstacle on his path to greatness, a lesson learned about not mixing feelings with business. He settled into his Italian leather chair, gazing out the panoramic window at the city lights that practically belonged to him. His empire stretched across the entire coast, from 5-star hotels to private resorts, where the world's powerful came to relax and conduct business. He was respected, feared, and envied in equal measure. "Would you like me to bring the wine list, sir?" a discreet waiter asked. "The bottle of Chateau Lafite Rothschild 2005, he replied, without even looking at the young man. "And make sure it's at the exact temperature." Mark took out his gold-plated phone and checked his messages. Chloe had texted that she would be a few minutes late due to traffic. Perfect. That gave him time to review emails from his international managers and confirm tomorrow's meetings in Paris. As he responded to a message about the construction of his new hotel in Monaco, a figure approached his table with a bottle of wine. Reflexively, he looked up to confirm it was the correct label, and that's when his world came to a complete halt. His gold phone slipped from his hands, and fell to the floor with a metallic clatter that echoed like a gong in the sudden silence that had taken over his mind. Sarah Miller stood before him, holding the wine bottle with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. She wore the restaurant uniform, an impeccable white blouse, a knee-length black skirt, and an apron that couldn't conceal what he immediately saw and what hit him like a direct punch to the heart. She was pregnant. Very pregnant. The rounded belly was unmistakable beneath the uniform, probably around 7 months. Her face had changed. She had lost that youthful softness he remembered, replaced by lines of fatigue and a pallor that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worries. Her hair, which she used to wear perfectly styled in expensive salons, was now pulled back in a simple, practical ponytail. But what struck him most were her eyes. Those green eyes that had once looked at him with unconditional love now observed him with a mixture of shock, humiliation, and something that seemed like pure panic. "Would you like me to open the bottle, sir?" Sarah asked, her voice attempting to sound professional, but cracking slightly at the edges. Mark remained paralyzed. His mind, which normally processed information at lightning speed to make multi-million-dollar business decisions, had simply disconnected. He couldn't process what he was seeing. Sarah, the woman he had cast out of his life like trash 3 years ago, stood before him, pregnant and serving tables. Memories flooded his mind like an unstoppable avalanche. Sarah at their wedding, radiant in a $50,000 dress, promising him eternal love. Sarah in their penthouse, cooking for him on Sunday mornings, humming softly as she made his coffee exactly how he liked it. Sarah crying that last night, begging him to consider having children, to think about building a family together. "Business is my priority," he had told her coldly. "A child would be a costly and unnecessary distraction. If you can't understand that, perhaps you're not the right woman for me." And now she was there, obviously expecting the child he had refused to have with her, working in a place where a single tip was probably more money than she saw in weeks. "Sir," Sarah repeated, her voice now more strained, aware that other clients and employees were beginning to notice the strange tension at the table. "Would you like me to open the bottle?" Mark tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. How had Sarah reached this point? After the divorce, he had made sure she received decent financial compensation. He hadn't been generous, but he hadn't left her on the street either. What had happened to that money? Who was the father of the baby she carried? Mark stammered, feeling like a nervous teenager for the first time in decades. Sarah took advantage of his confusion to tilt her head slightly in a gesture that might seem professional to any observer, but he recognized as a silent plea. "Please don't make a scene. Not here, not now." At that moment, Chloe's cheerful voice resonated from the restaurant entrance. "Mark, so sorry I'm late. Traffic was impossible." Chloe approached the table like an apparition from another dimension, in her designer dress that probably cost more than Sarah earned in 6 months, her jewels sparkling under the restaurant lights, and that confidence that only comes from a life free of real financial worries. Sarah saw Chloe approaching, and something changed in her expression. The momentary vulnerability was replaced by a mask of professional dignity that broke Mark's heart in a way he didn't understand. "Excuse me," Sarah said with a firm voice. "I'll send another waiter to assist you tonight." She turned to leave, but Mark, acting on an impulse he couldn't control, reached out and took her arm. "Sarah, wait." She turned back to him, and for a second, just 1 second, he saw in her eyes the raw pain and betrayal she had been carrying for 3 years. But then Chloe arrived at the table. "Is everything all right, darling?" Chloe asked, looking curiously at the scene. Mark, holding the arm of a pregnant waitress who seemed about to flee. Sarah gently freed herself from Mark's grasp and addressed Chloe with perfect professional courtesy. "Everything is perfect, miss. Enjoy your dinner." And without giving Mark another chance to speak, she walked away toward the kitchen, taking with her the emotional balance he had carefully built for 3 years. Chloe sat down, completely oblivious to the personal earthquake that had just shaken her companion. "Do you know that waitress? It looked like you knew each other," she commented casually as she reviewed the menu. Mark looked at her as if she were speaking a foreign language. His mind was still processing the image of Sarah, pregnant, tired, working in a place where he spent in one night what she probably earned in months. "No," he lied automatically. "I don't know her." But while Chloe chatted happily about her shopping day and her plans for the weekend on her yacht, Mark couldn't stop looking toward the kitchen, hoping to see that figure that had disappeared, but had left his world completely shattered. For the first time in 3 years, Mark Sterling, the man who controlled empires and moved millions with a single call, felt completely lost. And worst of all, he didn't understand why it mattered so much. The dinner became an exquisite torture. Mark pretended to listen to Chloe talk about her latest photo shoot in Milan, but his eyes obsessively searched for any trace of Sarah among the waiters coming and going. Every time a female figure appeared in his peripheral vision, his heart raced, only to plummet when he realized it wasn't her. "Mark, are you listening to me?" Chloe had stopped talking and was looking at him with a mixture of annoyance and concern. "You've been strange since you arrived. Did something happen in business?" "Sorry, darling." Mark forced his most charming smile, the one he had used to close multi-million-dollar contracts. "I'm just processing the details of the contract I closed today. It's a big step for the company." Chloe smiled, apparently satisfied with the explanation. After all, she was used to the powerful men she dated constantly thinking about money and business. It was part of the appeal. But Mark wasn't thinking about contracts. He was reliving every second of those few minutes with Sarah, analyzing every detail as if it were evidence in a criminal case. The way her hands trembled, the pallor of her face, the dark circles that makeup couldn't completely hide, and above all, that round belly that screamed a truth he didn't want to face. Sarah had moved on. She had found someone else. She had made the family dream he had destroyed a reality. "You know what?" Chloe leaned toward him with a flirtatious smile. "After dinner, we could go to your penthouse. I have a surprise for you." Under normal circumstances, Mark would have been delighted. Chloe was exactly the type of woman he was attracted to. Beautiful, sophisticated, without emotional complications. But tonight, the idea of intimacy with someone else seemed impossible. His mind was completely occupied by the image of Sarah disappearing into the kitchen. "Of course," he lied, raising his wine glass. "Let's toast to surprises." But as Chloe smiled and clinked her glass against his, Mark made a decision that would change the course of the night forever. "Excuse me for a moment." He stood up. "I need to make an important call. I'll be right back." Before Chloe could protest, Mark headed toward the back of the restaurant. His heart pounded as if he were running a marathon. He hadn't planned this. He hadn't thought about what he was going to say. But his body moved on its own impulse toward the kitchen. He stopped in front of the swinging doors that separated the elegant world of the dining room from the raw reality of the kitchen. Through the circular glass of one of the doors, he could see inside. Chefs rushing back and forth, waiters collecting plates, the organized chaos of a high-end restaurant in full operation. And then he saw her. Sarah was sitting on a small chair in a corner, one hand resting on her lower back, the other holding a glass of water. Her face showed clear signs of exhaustion, and for a moment she closed her eyes, as if gathering strength to continue. Mark felt as if someone had stabbed him in the chest. The woman who had once lived in a luxury penthouse, who had had access to the best spas and private doctors, who had never had to worry about anything more than choosing which designer dress to wear, was now clearly struggling to stay on her feet during a work shift. Without thinking further, he pushed open the doors and entered the kitchen. The noise and chaos hit him immediately. The heat of the stoves, the sound of knives chopping, the shouted orders of the chefs. Several employees looked at him with surprise and alarm. Customers definitely shouldn't be in the kitchen. "Sir, you can't be here." One of the sous chefs quickly approached, wiping his hands on his apron. But Mark paid him no attention. His eyes were fixed on Sarah, who had looked up at the commotion and now stared at him with an expression of absolute horror. "Sarah," he said, and his voice sounded strange even to him, laden with an emotion he didn't know how to handle. She immediately stood up, with an effort that was painful to watch, and approached him with a face red with embarrassment. "Mark, you can't be here," she whispered urgently, aware that all the employees were watching them. "Please, leave. I need to talk to you," he replied, completely ignoring the curious glances and protesting voices of the kitchen staff. "Not here, not now." Sarah took his arm with more force than he expected and guided him toward a back door that led to the alley. "You're going to get me in trouble. I need this job." They stepped out into the fresh night air, and for the first time in 3 years, they were completely alone. The contrast was brutal. The dirty, dimly lit alley versus the luxury of the restaurant they had left behind. Sarah leaned against the brick wall, breathing heavily, one hand instinctively protecting her belly. "What do you want, Mark?" she asked, and there was a hardness in her voice he had never heard before. "Did you come to laugh? To confirm you were right about me?" I didn't know you were working here." Mark felt like an idiot, stammering meaningless words. "I didn't know you were pregnant." Sarah let out a bitter laugh that broke his heart. "Of course you didn't know. Why would you? 3 years ago you told me very clearly that you wanted nothing more to do with my life." Memories of that final night returned like daggers. Sarah crying, begging him to reconsider the divorce. He, cold as ice, handing her the already prepared papers and telling her she could sign amicably, or his lawyers would ensure she didn't receive a penny. "The divorce money," Mark murmured. "I gave you enough to be set for years." Sarah's expression changed, becoming even harder. "The divorce money? You mean the $50,000 you gave me after 5 years of marriage, after I built my entire life around yours?" Mark felt as if he had been slapped. In his mind, $50,000 had been a generous amount. For him, it was what he spent in a weekend. But now, seeing Sarah pregnant and working as a waitress, he realized how ridiculously inadequate that sum had been. "Sarah, You thought what?" She interrupted him, and for the first time there were tears in her eyes. "You thought with 50,000 I could support myself for the rest of my life. You thought after 5 years of being your wife, where my only job was to be perfect for your business events, it would be easy to find work?" Mark was speechless. During their marriage, Sarah had left her job as an art teacher to dedicate herself completely to being the perfect wife. She had organized his events, decorated his homes, been his companion at every important social function. He had never stopped to think about how difficult it would be for her to rebuild a career after the divorce. "How many months are you?" he asked, changing the subject because he couldn't bear to face his own guilt. Sarah unconsciously touched her belly. 7.5 months. Mark quickly did the math in his head. That meant she had gotten pregnant less than 6 months after the divorce. The idea of Sarah with another man so soon after their separation hurt him in a way he didn't understand. "Who's the father?" he asked before he could stop himself. Sarah looked at him as if he had hit her. "That's none of your business. I just want to know if he's taking good care of you," Mark insisted, even though he knew he had no right to ask. "If you need help." "Help?" Sarah let out another bitter laugh. "Now you want to help? Where was that concern when you left me with $50,000 and told me you never wanted to see me again?" Mark ran his hands through his hair, frustrated. Sarah, I didn't know. If you had known things were so bad for me, what would you have done? She challenged him. Would you have sent more money to soothe your conscience? Would you have hired someone to take care of the problem for you? I don't know, he admitted, and the honesty of his answer surprised them both. Sarah studied him in silence for a moment. In the dim alley light, Mark could see the lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the way she held her back, the swelling in her feet that protruded from her cheap uniform shoes. Do you know what the saddest thing about all this is? Sarah asked softly. It's not that I'm working as a pregnant waitress. It's not that I live in a one-bedroom apartment that costs half of what you spent on wine every month. The saddest thing is that for 5 years, I truly believed you loved me. Those words hit Mark like a hammer to the chest. Sarah, I did love you. No. She shook her head. You loved the idea of me. You loved having a beautiful wife who looked good on your arm at galas. You loved that I was smart enough to hold interesting conversations with your partners, but not ambitious enough to compete with you. But you never loved me. At that moment, the back door of the restaurant opened, and an older man in a manager's suit appeared. Sarah, you're needed in the dining room. Yes, sir. She looked at Mark with disapproval. You need to return to your companion. Customers are not allowed in employee areas. Mark wanted to protest. He wanted to demand more time, more answers. But the look of panic on Sarah's face stopped him. Please, she whispered, don't make me lose this job. It's all I have. Without another word, Sarah headed back inside, leaving Mark alone in the alley, with more questions than answers, and a pain in his chest he didn't know how to relieve. When he returned to his table, Chloe was waiting with an impatient expression. Where were you? Your food's getting cold. Mark sat down and looked at his $200 plate, the same price Sarah probably earned in an entire night's work. For the first time in his life, the luxury surrounding him seemed obscene. Chloe, he said suddenly, I think we should leave. But as he paid the bill with his unlimited black card, his mind was already formulating a plan. This encounter was far from over. What do you think Mark's plan is? Share your predictions in the comments. Mark didn't sleep that night, nor the next, nor the one after that. From his $20 million penthouse, with panoramic views of the entire city, he stayed awake until dawn, gazing out the windows at the flickering lights below. Somewhere among those lights was Sarah, probably in a small, cheap apartment, struggling to sleep with a 7.5-month belly while worrying about paying the month's bills. The image tormented him. For 3 years, he had managed to convince himself that he had made the right decision. Marriage had been a mistake. Sarah had been too emotional, too dependent, too human for the world he lived in. He had told himself that she would be better off without him, that she would find someone more suited to her domestic needs. But seeing her in that restaurant had shattered all his justifications. Mr. Sterling. Carmen, his personal assistant, pulled him from his thoughts. It's 10:30 a.m. Your meeting with the Japanese investors is in an hour. Mark turned from the window, aware that he was wearing the same clothes as the day before. Carmen looked at him with professional but discreet concern. In the 5 years she had worked for him, she had never seen him so discomposed. Cancel the meeting, Mark said, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. Sir? Carmen blinked in surprise. But it's the Tokyo Hotel's contract. They've flown specifically to... Let Robert handle it. Tell them I have a family emergency. Carmen opened her mouth to protest, but something in Mark's expression stopped her. In 5 years, he had never canceled an important meeting. He had never put anything above business, and he had definitely never mentioned having family. Is there anything else I can do for you, sir? She asked carefully. Mark looked at her for a long moment. Carmen was efficient, discreet, and had shown absolute loyalty for years. If anyone could help him, it was her. I need you to investigate someone, he finally said. But this is completely confidential. Not a word to anyone. Not even Robert. Carmen nodded, pulling out her tablet. Of course, sir. What do you need to know? Sarah Miller. She was Sarah Sterling until 3 years ago. I need to know where she lives. What's her exact financial situation? Where has she worked since the divorce? And he paused. Above all, I need to know everything about the man who got her pregnant. Carmen typed quickly, asking no questions. She was too professional for that. But Mark could see the curiosity in her eyes. How quickly do you need this information? By this afternoon. Carmen nodded and headed for the door. But Mark stopped her. Carmen, one more thing. I want medical information too. I need to know if she and the baby are all right. This time, Carmen couldn't completely hide her surprise, but she merely nodded before leaving the office. Mark spent the rest of the morning pacing his penthouse like a caged animal. He tried to work, but couldn't concentrate. He tried to call Chloe, but the idea of feigning interest in her superficial conversation nauseated him. He tried to go to the gym, but every repetition on the weight bench brought him back to the image of Sarah holding her aching back. At 3 p.m., Carmen returned with a thick folder and an expression Mark couldn't interpret. It wasn't exactly compassion, but it wasn't professional indifference either. What did you find? Mark asked immediately. Carmen sat across from his desk, clearly uncomfortable with what she had to report. Mr. Sterling, this is complicated. Mark braced himself for the worst. Tell me everything. Sarah Miller lives in a 1-bedroom apartment in the San Miguel sector. Rent is $800 a month, utilities included. She works at the Obsidian table 5 nights a week, earning $12 an hour plus tips. She also works weekends cleaning houses in the Lomas neighborhood. Every word was like a slap. Mark quickly calculated. Sarah earned less in a month than he spent on a single business dinner. And the baby's father? He asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Carmen opened the folder and pulled out several documents. This is where it gets painful. What do you mean? The baby's father is David Hayes, a 35-year-old architect. Sarah began a relationship with him approximately 8 months after your divorce. According to my sources, it was a serious relationship. He proposed marriage when they found out about the pregnancy. Mark felt as if someone had stabbed him in the chest and was slowly twisting the knife. Sarah had moved on. She had found love again. She had been about to get married. What happened? He asked. His voice tense. Carmen looked at him with something akin to compassion. David Hayes had another secret. He was married. Married? Married for 8 years with 2 young children. Sarah didn't know. She discovered the truth when she was 5 months pregnant, when his legitimate wife showed up at her apartment. Mark closed his eyes, imagining the scene. Sarah, pregnant and excited about her new life, discovering that the man she loved had been deceiving her all along. And what did he do? He told her it had all been a mistake, that he had never planned to leave his family. He offered her money to resolve the situation, and when Sarah refused, he told her he wanted nothing more to do with the baby. Carmen paused. That was 2 months ago. He hasn't contacted her since. The information hit Mark like an avalanche. Sarah had found love after him. She had built hopes for a new family, only to discover she had been deceived again. And now she was alone, pregnant, working herself to exhaustion to support herself. There's more, Carmen continued, consulting her notes. More? Sarah has been going to a public clinic for her prenatal care because she can't afford private health insurance. She's had some minor complications. High blood pressure, anemia. Probably related to stress and overwork. Complications? Mark was immediately alarmed. Is the baby all right? According to medical records, both she and the baby are fine for now, but doctors have recommended reducing her work hours and stress. Obviously, that hasn't been possible given her financial situation. Carmen pulled out more documents. I also discovered something else about her situation after the divorce. Sarah tried to go back to work as a teacher, but most private schools wouldn't hire her because she had been out of the field for 5 years. Public ones had huge waiting lists. She ended up working in customer service jobs, in stores, in coffee shops. When she started showing her pregnancy, many employers fired her with excuses. Mark stood up abruptly, walking to the window. Why didn't she contact me? Why didn't she ask for help when David abandoned her? Carmen looked at him with a strange expression. Sir, do you remember what your last words to her were? Mark vividly remembered that final night. If you ever have problems in life, they're not mine. You chose to leave. Now, live with the consequences. He had been so cruel, so definitive. How could Sarah have come to him for help after that? There's one more thing, Carmen said softly. Something I found in the hospital records. What? In the medical documentation, Sarah put your name as her emergency contact. Mark turned quickly. What? She has no family here, sir. Her parents died years ago. She has no siblings. When they asked her who to call in case of emergency during childbirth, she put your name and your office number. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Why would she do that? He murmured more to himself than to Carmen. Perhaps, Carmen suggested carefully. Because despite everything that happened, you are still the most important person in her life. Mark sank into his chair, overwhelmed by emotions he didn't know how to handle. Sarah had been betrayed by 2 men. First by him, who had cruelly abandoned her, and then by David, who had deceived and abandoned her pregnant. And yet, when she needed to put the name of someone she trusted in case of a medical emergency, she had put his. What am I going to do, Carmen? He asked. And for the first time in years, his voice sounded vulnerable, human. That depends on you, sir. But if you'll allow me a personal observation, say it. In 5 years working for you, I've never seen you so affected by anything other than business. And Sarah Miller is the only person I've seen who makes you behave like a real human being instead of a money-making machine. Mark looked at Carmen in surprise. She had never spoken so directly. What do you suggest? I suggest you go see her, but not as the millionaire CEO who's going to rescue the damsel in distress. Go as the man who still loves her and wants a chance to be better than he was before. Mark stood up with a determination he hadn't felt in years. You're right, but first, I want you to do something for me. Whatever you need, contact the best private obstetrician in the city, Dr. Evans at St. Jude's Hospital. Arrange an appointment for Sarah under a false name if necessary. And I want you to anonymously pay her rent for the next 6 months. What if she refuses to accept the help? Then I'll find another way, Mark replied, heading for the door. But I'm not going to allow the woman I love to raise her child in poverty when I have the power to change that. Carmen remained silent for a moment. Sir? What? Are you sure you want to do this? Sarah isn't just a pregnant ex-wife who needs help. She's a woman who has been betrayed by 2 men, who is fighting to maintain her dignity while raising a child alone. If you're going to re-enter her life, you have to be prepared to stay. She can't bear to be abandoned a 3rd time. Mark stopped at the door, considering Carmen's words. For 3 years, he had lived believing he needed no one, that love was a weakness, that family was a distraction from important business. But seeing Sarah pregnant and struggling alone had shattered all those beliefs. Carmen, for 3 years I've been the richest and most miserable man in the country. I've had everything money can buy, and I haven't been happy a single day. But in the 5 minutes I spent talking to Sarah in that alley, I felt more alive than I had in years. He opened the door and turned to Carmen one last time. I'm going to get my family back. Not the family I had, but the family I should have built, if I hadn't been such an idiot, and so proud. And the fact that the baby isn't biologically yours? Mark smiled for the first time in days, but it was a different smile. It wasn't the cold, calculated smile of the ruthless CEO. It was the smile of a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. Carmen, that baby is going to grow up without a father because a coward abandoned him. If Sarah gives me the chance, I'm going to be the best father that child could ever have, no matter who fathered him." As the elevator took him to the parking lot, Mark no longer thought about multi-million-dollar contracts or business empires. He thought about Sarah cleaning houses at 7 months pregnant. He thought about her crying alone in her apartment when David abandoned her. He thought about her putting his name as an emergency contact because she had no one else. But above all, he thought about the opportunity life was giving him to be the man he should have been from the beginning. The war to win Sarah back had begun. And this time, he wasn't going to lose. What do you think will happen next? Leave your predictions in the comments below. Mark arrived at the Obsidian table at 7:30 p.m., but this time, he didn't arrive in his black Bentley with a chauffeur. He had left the luxury car at home and taken a taxi, aware that appearing with all his ostentation would be exactly the opposite of what he needed to do. Tonight, he wasn't the millionaire CEO visiting an exclusive restaurant. He was a desperate man trying to win back the woman he had lost due to his own stupidity. He stood on the sidewalk for 10 full minutes, watching through the restaurant windows, searching for Sarah among the waiters who moved elegantly between tables. His heart pounded so loudly he could hear it over the traffic noise. He had no plan. He hadn't rehearsed what to say. He just knew he couldn't spend another night knowing what he now knew without doing something about it. When he finally saw her, his legs almost gave out. Sarah was attending a table of businessmen, smiling professionally as she took their order. But Mark could see beyond the professional mask. He could see how she discreetly held her lower back when she thought no one was looking. He could see the fatigue in her eyes. He could see how she had put on extra foundation to hide the dark circles. And he could see her belly, more prominent now that he had seen her in profile, carrying the child of a man who had abandoned her without looking back. "Do you have a reservation, sir?" the maitre d' asked when he finally entered the restaurant. "No, but—" Mark began. Then he stopped. He couldn't use his name. Sarah worked here, and if her colleagues found out that the millionaire CEO Mark Sterling was there for her, it could get her into trouble. "Could you give me a table in the section where that waitress is working?" He pointed discreetly towards Sarah. The maitre d' followed his gaze and frowned slightly. "Sir, Sarah is attending the VIP area tonight. Those tables require a minimum consumption of $500. "Perfect," Mark replied immediately, pulling out his wallet. 10 minutes later, he was sitting at a table for two in Sarah's section, pretending to study the menu while actually studying her every move. The way she moved slower than normal. The way she breathed deeply before lifting heavy trays. The way she smiled at customers with perfect professional courtesy. But the smile disappeared immediately when she thought no one was looking. Sarah hadn't seen him yet. She was busy with a table of 6, who were clearly making her run back and forth with constant requests. Mark watched with growing indignation as one of the men yelled at her for bringing sparkling water instead of still, and how Sarah apologized repeatedly as she rushed to correct the error. When she finally finished with that table and headed toward his, Mark saw the exact moment she recognized him. Her steps slowed, her posture tensed, and an expression of pure panic crossed her face before she could control it. She approached his table with the same professional expression she had used the night before, but Mark could see her hands trembling slightly as she held her notepad. "Good evening," she said with a carefully controlled voice. "May I offer you something to drink, Sarah?" Mark said softly. "We need to talk." "I'm working," she replied quickly, her eyes nervously darting toward her co-workers. "If you'd like to place an order—" "I've been investigating," Mark interrupted, and saw her eyes widen in shock. "I know about David. I know what he did to you." Sarah's face went completely pale. Her notepad slipped from her hands and fell to the floor with a clatter that made several people turn to look. "You can't be here talking about that," Sarah whispered desperately, bending down to pick up the notepad. "Please, Mark, they'll fire me." "Then come with me." Mark stood up. "Let's go somewhere we can talk privately." "I can't leave my shift," Sarah protested. But her voice was breaking. "I need this job. I need every penny that—" "For what?" Mark asked directly. "To pay the rent on a horrible apartment? To buy cheap food that doesn't give you the nutrition you need? To go to a public clinic where they treat you like cattle?" Sarah looked at him as if he had slapped her. "How dare you? How dare you investigate my private life? Who gave you the right to—" "The right is given to me by the fact that I love you," Mark exploded, and his voice was loud enough that several tables turned to look. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stood paralyzed, looking at him with an expression of total shock. Mark realized he had said the words he had been denying even to himself for 3 years. "Ms. Miller!" The restaurant manager's voice cut the tension like a knife. "Is there a problem here?" Sarah turned to the manager, clearly panicking. "No, Mr. Thompson, everything is fine. The gentleman was leaving," Mark said firmly, taking out a $100 bill and placing it on the table. "But first, I'd like to speak with you about Sarah." "With me?" Mr. Thompson looked confused. "Yes. Do you know that Sarah is 7.5 months pregnant?" "Of course The manager replied defensively. "But as long as she can do her job? And do you know that doctors have recommended she reduce her work hours due to stress-related complications?" Mr. Thompson looked at Sarah in surprise. "Is that true?" Sarah opened her mouth to answer, but Mark continued. "And do you know that she's working 2 jobs because the salary you pay her here isn't even enough to cover her basic expenses?" "Sir," the manager now looked uncomfortable. "I don't know who you are, but our employees' labor matters are—" "I'm Mark Sterling," Mark said, and he saw the manager stiffen as he recognized the name. "And Sarah is my ex-wife." If there had been silence before, now there was a complete void. Mark could see other employees and customers trying to discreetly listen to the conversation. He could see the absolute mortification on Sarah's face. "Your ex-wife?" Mr. Thompson repeated, clearly trying to process this information. "My ex-wife, who is now pregnant and working herself to exhaustion because I was an idiot who left her with nothing when we divorced," Mark continued, no longer caring who was listening, "and who deserves much more respect and consideration than she's getting here." Sarah finally found her voice. "Mark, stop. Please, just stop." But there were tears running down her cheeks, and they weren't tears of shame. They were tears of something much more complex. Relief, confusion, fear, and maybe, just maybe, a little of the old hope that had been buried for 3 years. "Mr. Sterling." The manager was clearly nervous now, probably calculating how much money someone like Mark spent at the restaurant. "If there's anything we can do to better accommodate Sarah—" "What you can do," Mark said firmly, "is give her the rest of the night off. I'll pay for any lost tips." "That's not necessary," Sarah protested weakly. "Yes, it is." Mark looked her directly in the eyes. "Because we're going to dinner, somewhere you can sit comfortably, order what you really want to eat, and talk without worrying about impressing customers." "I can't," Sarah whispered. "I can't do this again, Mark." "Do what again?" "Trust you," she replied, and the words came out as a sob. "I can't trust that you won't disappear again when you get tired of playing savior." Mark felt as if each word was a direct stab to the heart, but he knew he deserved them all. "You're right," he admitted. "You have every right in the world not to trust me. I was a coward 3 years ago. I was cruel. I was everything I should never have been to you." He took another step closer, aware that everyone was watching them, but he no longer cared. "But Sarah, what I discovered about David, about how he abandoned you, about how you've been struggling alone, I can't live with that. I can't wake up every day knowing that the woman I love is carrying all that weight alone." "The woman you love?" Sarah repeated, and there was a mixture of disbelief and pain in her voice. Now you love me? After 3 years of knowing nothing about me? After seeing me at my worst? I've loved you all these years, Mark admitted, his voice breaking slightly. Every day I spent convincing myself I had done the right thing. A part of me knew I had made the worst mistake of my life. But I was too proud, too stubborn to admit it. Sarah wiped her tears with the back of her hand, smudging her makeup slightly. And what changed? She asked. What changed for you to be here now, making a scene at my workplace, saying things that— What changed, Mark interrupted, is that I realized I've spent 3 years being the richest and most miserable man in the country. What changed is that I saw you last night and remembered what it meant to feel alive. What changed is that I discovered you've been betrayed by 2 men, and I can't be the second man to abandon you without fighting for you. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the awkward silence of a few minutes ago. It was the silence of 2 people truly looking at each other for the first time in 3 years, seeing not the idealized or demonized versions they had built in their minds, but the real people standing before them. Sarah, Mr. Thompson gently interrupted. Do you want to take the rest of the night off? There will be no problem with your job. Sarah looked between the manager and Mark, clearly torn by the decision. If you come with me, Mark said softly, it won't be like before. It won't be the millionaire rescuing the damsel in distress. It will be 2 people who hurt each other, trying to see if they can heal together. Sarah closed her eyes for a long moment, as if gathering courage to make a decision that could change her life forever. When she opened them, there was a silent determination in them. Give me 5 minutes to change, she finally said. Mark felt as if he could fly. Really? A dinner? Sarah quickly clarified. A conversation. That's all I'm promising. That's all I'm asking, Mark replied, though they both knew he was lying. He was asking for much more than that. He was asking for a second chance to be the man he should have been from the beginning. He was asking for the opportunity to love not only Sarah, but the child she carried. He was asking for the opportunity to build the family he had been too idiotic to value the first time. As Sarah disappeared toward the employee changing room, Mark stood in the restaurant, aware that the next few hours would determine the rest of his life. He would either win back the woman of his dreams or lose her forever. And for the first time in 3 years, something mattered more to him than making money. It mattered to win back Sarah's heart. Do you think Sarah will give Mark a real second chance? What would you do in her shoes? Let us know in the comments. Mark had carefully chosen the restaurant. Little Italy, a cozy, family-friendly place 10 minutes from the Obsidian table. It wasn't exclusive or expensive. It didn't have linen tablecloths or crystal chandeliers. It was exactly the opposite of the places he used to take Sarah when they were married. It was real, authentic, the kind of place where a pregnant woman could sit comfortably without feeling judged by her appearance. Sarah had emerged from the changing room, wearing simple maternity jeans and a plain blue cotton blouse that made her green eyes sparkle in a way Mark had forgotten was possible. Without her work makeup and with her hair loose, falling over her shoulders, she looked younger, more vulnerable, more like the woman he had fallen in love with years ago. But she also looked exhausted. The dark circles were more evident without makeup, and Mark could see how every step cost her an effort she tried to hide. How did you get here? Mark asked her as they walked slowly down the sidewalk. By bus? Sarah simply replied. Mark felt a pang of guilt. How long does it take you to get from your apartment to the restaurant? An hour and a half, she admitted. I have to take 2 different buses. Mark quickly did the math in his head. Sarah traveled 3 hours daily just to commute to and from work, standing. 7.5 months pregnant, while he complained if his chauffeur was 5 minutes late. Sarah, No. She stopped him before he could finish. Let's not start with that. Let's not start with pity or how much my life is different from yours. If we're going to do this, if we're going to have this conversation, it has to be between equals." Mark nodded, though he didn't fully understand how they could be equals when the difference in their circumstances was so abysmal. When they arrived at the restaurant, Mark immediately noticed how Sarah relaxed slightly. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, with soft music in the background and the aroma of homemade Italian food filling the air. The hostess, an older woman with a genuine smile, led them to a table in a quiet corner. "Something to drink to start?" The waitress, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 20, asked. "Water with lemon, please," Sarah replied. "And for you, sir?" Mark was about to order his usual wine, a $200 bottle of Cabernet, when he stopped himself. "Water with lemon, too." Sarah looked at him in surprise, but said nothing. When they were alone again, they sat in silence for several minutes, both studying the menus as if they were complex legal documents. Finally, Sarah was the first to speak. "Why now, Mark?" she asked without looking up from the menu. "Why, after 3 years of absolute silence, do you appear in my life just when I'm at my most vulnerable?" Mark placed his menu on the table. "Because I'm a coward." Sarah looked up, surprised by the brutal honesty of his answer. "For 3 years," Mark continued, "I've had your phone number memorized. I've driven by your neighborhood hundreds of times without having the courage to stop. I've started writing emails to you that I never sent. I've been in self-imposed misery because I was too proud to admit I had made the worst mistake of my life." "And what changed?" Sarah asked softly. "Seeing you pregnant forced me to confront something I had been denying," Mark admitted. "It forced me to face the fact that while I was playing the successful bachelor, you had found someone else. You had moved on. You had built the family I had refused to have with you." Sarah looked down, her hands unconsciously moving to protect her belly. "But when I discovered the truth about David," Mark continued, "when I found out he had lied to you, that he had used you, that he had abandoned you exactly as I did, I couldn't live with myself knowing that you had been betrayed by 2 men, and that I was the first." "David wasn't like you," Sarah said softly. "What do you mean?" Sarah took a deep breath before answering. "When you divorced me, at least you were honest about what you wanted. You told me directly that you didn't want children, that you didn't want a wife who was an emotional burden, that you wanted to be free to focus on your business. It was cruel, but it was honest." Mark felt every word like a slap, but he let her continue. "David made me believe he loved me. He made me believe he wanted to build a family with me. He made me believe that this time I had found someone who truly saw me as a partner, not as an accessory." Tears began to form in her eyes. "Do you know what it's like to discover that everything you've hoped for, everything you've put your faith in, is a lie?" Sarah asked. "Do you know what it's like to be 5 months pregnant, excited to show your fiancé the baby's ultrasound, only for his wife to show up at your door?" Mark closed his eyes, imagining the scene. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I don't want your pity," she replied quickly. "That's not why I'm here." "Then why are you here?" Sarah looked him directly in the eyes for the first time that night. "Because when they asked me who to put as an emergency contact at the hospital, the only name I could think of was yours." The silence that followed was charged with meaning. Mark could feel his heart pounding so hard, he was sure Sarah could hear it. "Why?" he whispered. "Because despite everything that happened between us, despite how our marriage ended, I never doubted that if I really needed you, if I was truly in danger, you would come for me." Mark felt as if someone had wrapped his heart with a giant hand and squeezed it. "I would always come for you," he admitted. "Always." At that moment, the waitress returned. "Have you decided what you're going to order?" Sarah ordered simple tomato pasta and a small salad. Mark ordered the same, although he would normally have ordered the most expensive dish on the menu. When they were alone again, Sarah continued. "Do you know what the real difference between you two was?" "What?" You broke my heart because you were honest about who you were. You told me from the beginning that business was your priority, that you didn't want emotional complications. I was the idiot who thought I could change you." Mark opened his mouth to protest, but Sarah continued. "David broke my heart because he lied about who he was. He made me believe he was the man I needed, when in reality, he was a liar who already had a family." "Sarah, but the most important difference," she interrupted him, "is that with you, even in our worst moments, I never felt you were a bad man. I felt you were a man who was afraid to love. With David, when I discovered the truth, I realized he was simply a bad man." Mark leaned forward. "And what am I now?" Sarah studied him for a long moment. "I don't know. That's the truth. I don't know if you're the same scared man from 3 years ago or if you've really changed. What would I have to do to prove to you that I've changed?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But I do know what you can't do." "What?" "You can't show up in my life as the millionaire savior who's going to rescue me from my poverty. You can't use your money to buy me back, and you can't promise me things you're not sure you can deliver." Mark nodded. "What can I do then?" Sarah placed her hands on her belly, looking down for a moment before looking back at him. "You can tell me the truth about why you're really here, not the romantic version about lost love. The real truth." Mark took a deep breath. This was his chance to be completely honest, or lose her forever. "The truth," he began slowly, "is that for 3 years I've been empty. I've made more money, expanded my empire, dated beautiful women, and felt nothing real, nothing genuine." Sarah listened in silence. "The truth is that seeing you pregnant made me realize that while I was playing the successful bachelor, you had moved on and found what I had been too cowardly to seek with you. And that bothered you. It shattered me," Mark admitted. "It shattered me because it made me realize that I had lost not only a wife, but the opportunity to be a father, to have a real family, to have something in my life that mattered more than the numbers in a bank account." Mark paused as their food arrived, but neither of them started eating immediately. "And now what do you want?" Sarah asked. "I want the opportunity to be the man I should have been with you. I want the opportunity to love not only you, but the baby you're carrying. I want the opportunity to be the father that child deserves, even if I'm not his biological father." Sarah blinked in surprise. "You know he's not yours?" "Yes," Mark replied without hesitation. "And I don't care. A child is going to grow up without a father because a coward abandoned him. If you give me the chance, I'm going to be the best father that child could ever have." Tears began to stream down Sarah's cheeks. "Why would you do that?" "Because I love you," Mark replied simply. "Because I've wasted 3 years pretending I didn't love you, and I don't want to waste another day. And because that baby is going to be part of you, which automatically makes him the most important thing in the world to me." Sarah wiped her tears with a napkin. "Mark, this isn't a romantic movie. This is real life. Being a father to a baby that's not biologically yours, especially when the mother has been betrayed by 2 men, isn't just a romantic decision you make in a restaurant." "I know," Mark replied. "That's why I'm not asking for an answer tonight. I'm asking for the opportunity to prove to you that I'm serious." "How?" Mark took a deep breath. "Let me help you with the pregnancy. Not as the millionaire who rescues you, but as the man who loves you and wants to make sure you and the baby are all right. Let me take you to your doctor's appointments. Let me be there when the baby is born. Let me prove to you day after day that I'm not going to disappear." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. "What if you find out it's harder than you thought? What if the baby cries all night? What if I have postpartum depression? What if the reality of having a family isn't as romantic as it seems now?" "Then we'll face it together," Mark replied without hesitation. "As it should have been from the beginning." Sarah finally took a bite of her pasta, chewing slowly as she processed everything she had heard. "I have one condition," she finally said. "Whatever it is, if we do this, if I give you this chance, It can't be gradual. You can't start by being the weekend boyfriend who shows up when it's convenient. If you want to be part of our lives, you have to be completely committed from the beginning. Mark nodded immediately. What does that mean exactly? It means that when the baby is born, you're going to be there. When he has colic at 3 a.m., you're going to be there. When he needs diaper changes, you're going to be there. When I'm exhausted and hormonal and completely impossible to bear, you're going to be there. I'll be there, Mark promised. And your businesses? I can run my company from anywhere. Technology allows me to have virtual meetings, sign contracts electronically, and I have capable employees who can handle daily operations. Sarah smiled for the first time all night, though it was a small, cautious smile. Mark Sterling, the obsessive workaholic, is willing to work from home to change diapers. Mark Sterling, the man who lost the most important woman in his life for being an obsessive idiot with work, is willing to do whatever it takes not to lose this second chance, he corrected. Sarah put her fork on the table and looked at him directly. One chance, she finally said. I'm going to give you one chance. But Mark, if you hurt me again, if you disappear when things get tough, if you decide this isn't what you really wanted, there won't be a third chance. Mark felt as if he had won the lottery and climbed Everest at the same time. There will be no need for a third chance, he promised. This time I'm going to do it right. As they finished their dinner, talking about doctors and baby preparations and plans for the future, Mark realized something fundamental. For the first time in 3 years, he was completely happy. He hadn't closed a multi-million-dollar contract. He hadn't won a business competition. He hadn't acquired a new property. He had simply regained the hope of having a family, and that was worth more than all the money in the world. What do you think of Mark's transformation? Is he truly changed? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Mark woke up at 5:30 a.m. the following Monday with a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Real purpose. It wasn't the artificial adrenaline of closing a multi-million-dollar contract or the empty satisfaction of beating a competitor. It was something much deeper and more terrifying. Genuine responsibility towards another person. Sarah had a doctor's appointment at 9 a.m. at the public clinic, and he had insisted on taking her. Over the past 3 days, since their revealing dinner, they had talked on the phone every night. Cautious but gradually warmer conversations, where he learned details about her pregnancy that filled him with both excitement and devastating guilt for everything he had missed. He showered quickly and got dressed, but for the first time in decades, he didn't put on one of his $5,000 suits. Instead, he chose jeans and a simple cotton shirt. He wanted to look approachable, normal, like someone who could be genuinely comfortable in a public clinic where Sarah had been receiving prenatal care. His chauffeur, Carlos, waited for him at the building entrance as always, but Mark stopped him before he could open the Bentley's door. Carlos, I'm driving myself today, he told him, heading towards his more discreet BMW. Carlos looked at him as if he had announced he was going to the moon. Sir, and Carlos, Mark stopped. Cancel all my meetings this week. I'll be busy with personal matters. During the drive to Sarah's apartment, Mark felt a mixture of nervousness and anticipation he hadn't felt since his first teenage date. His hands sweated as he drove through streets that led him to a neighborhood he had never visited, to a life he had never imagined he would want to live. The San Miguel sector was exactly what he had expected, and worse. 4-story apartment buildings with peeling paint, small family businesses with handmade signs, children playing on the sidewalks because there were no nearby parks. It was the kind of place he had escaped in his youth and sworn never to return to. But now, as he parked in front of the building where Sarah lived, he felt no contempt or pity. He felt respect for a woman who had managed to maintain her dignity and build a life in circumstances that would have broken him. Apartment 3B was on the 3rd floor, and there was no elevator. Mark climbed the concrete stairs, noticing the cracks in the walls and the smell of dampness that permeated the building. When he knocked on the door, Sarah opened almost immediately, as if she had been waiting by the entrance. "You're early?" she said, but there was a small smile on her face that made Mark's heart race. "I wanted to make sure we got there on time," he replied, and then he caught his breath. Sarah wore a simple navy blue maternity dress that probably cost less than $30, but she looked more beautiful than he remembered ever seeing her. Her belly was more prominent than it had appeared under the restaurant uniform, and there was a glow to her skin that he had heard about, the pregnancy glow, but had never actually seen. "Are you ready?" he asked her. "Almost." Sarah disappeared into the apartment for a moment, returning with a manila folder that clearly contained all her medical documents. "Are you sure you want to do this? The public clinic isn't exactly St. Jude's Hospital." "Sarah." Mark gently took her hand. "I want to be at every doctor's appointment, every ultrasound, every important moment of this pregnancy. I don't care if it's at the most basic clinic in the world." As they went down the stairs, Mark noticed how Sarah held onto the handrail and paused briefly at each landing. His immediate instinct was to offer help, but something in her expression told him she needed to maintain her independence. "How are you feeling this morning?" he asked instead. "Fine," Sarah replied automatically. Then she corrected herself. "Well, not exactly fine. The baby's been very active at night. I think he's going to be a soccer player." Mark smiled. "Can I feel him move?" Sarah stopped on the second floor, looking at him in surprise. "You really want to? If you don't mind." Sarah took his hand and placed it on her belly. At first, Mark felt nothing but the warmth of her skin through the fabric of her dress. But then, as if the baby had been waiting for the introduction, he felt a definite movement against his palm. "Oh my God," he whispered, and there were tears in his eyes he hadn't expected. "It's real. It's really real." "Of course it's real." Sarah laughed softly. "What did you think?" I don't know," Mark admitted, keeping his hand on her belly as he felt another movement. "I guess part of me still couldn't believe you were going to be a mother. And now," Mark looked her directly in the eyes, "now I know you're going to be the most incredible mother in the world, and that baby is going to be the luckiest child to have you." The moment was interrupted by a door opening on the second floor. An older woman poked her head out, saw Sarah with an unknown man, and smiled. "Good morning, mija," she said to Sarah in Spanish. "How's the baby today?" "Very active, Mrs. Garcia," Sarah replied warmly. "Mark, this is my neighbor, Mrs. Garcia." "Mrs. Garcia, this is Mark." Mrs. Garcia studied Mark with the evaluating gaze of an older woman who had seen enough life to judge a person's character in seconds. "So, you're the famous Mark," she said in slow, deliberate Spanish. "Famous?" Mark looked at Sarah in confusion. Sarah blushed slightly. "I might have mentioned you once or twice. More like once or twice every day," Mrs. Garcia corrected with a knowing smile. "I hope you're a better man than she deserves, because this girl is a treasure." "Yes, ma'am," Mark replied in his perfect Spanish, surprising both Sarah and Mrs. Garcia. "I'm going to do my best to live up to her." Mrs. Garcia nodded in approval. "Good. And if you don't, the whole neighborhood will know." As they continued down to the car, Sarah looked at him curiously. "I didn't know you spoke Spanish so well." "I grew up in these kinds of neighborhoods," Mark admitted. "Before my company took off, before the expensive suits and luxury cars. But it had been so long since I used it that I thought I had forgotten." "You never mentioned that when we were married." "When we were married, I was trying to be someone I wasn't," Mark replied honestly. "I was trying to convince myself that I had completely left my past behind." When they reached the car, Sarah paused at the sight of the BMW. "Is this your car?" "One of them," Mark admitted. "Would you prefer we took a taxi?" "No, it's much more normal than I expected." "I'm trying to be more normal," Mark smiled, though I'm not sure it's working. The drive to the clinic took 20 minutes. during which Sarah told him about her experiences with the public health system. Mark listened with growing horror to stories about canceled appointments, long waiting times, and doctors who treated her in a hurry because they had too many patients and too little time. "Sarah," Mark said, when they parked in front of the clinic, "why didn't you tell me how bad your medical care was?" "When was I going to tell you?" she replied. "During the 3 years we didn't speak?" Guilt hit him like a wave. "You're right, but now that we know what we know, could we consider transferring you to a private doctor?" Sarah tensed immediately. "Mark, we talked about this. You can't just show up and start buying solutions to all my problems." "I'm not trying to buy solutions," Mark protested. "I'm trying to make sure you and the baby receive the best possible care." "And what if things don't work out between us?" Sarah asked directly. "What if in 2 months you decide this is harder than you thought? Am I going to be stuck with private medical bills I can't pay?" Mark was silent for a moment, processing the validity of her concerns. "You're right," he admitted finally. "I haven't thought about this from your perspective. What do you suggest?" "I suggest we start with the small things," Sarah replied. "Come with me to this appointment. Meet the doctor. See what my medical care is really like. And then, if after a few weeks you still want to help with the medical aspects, we can talk about options." Mark nodded. Fair enough. The clinic was exactly what he had expected. Crowded waiting rooms, uncomfortable plastic chairs, faded posters on the walls, and a smell of disinfectant that couldn't completely hide other, less pleasant odors. Sarah checked in at reception and was told the doctor was running 45 minutes late. "Is this normal?" Mark asked her as they sat on chairs that clearly hadn't been designed for pregnant women. "Completely normal," Sarah replied, making herself as comfortable as she could. "Sometimes I wait 2 hours." Mark looked around the waiting room. There were other pregnant women, some with small children running around. Others who were clearly dealing with high-risk pregnancies, all patiently waiting in conditions he wouldn't have tolerated for 5 minutes for a business appointment. "How do you do this?" he murmured. "Do what? Maintain your patience, your dignity, your hope in a place like this." Sarah looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully interpret. "Mark, most women in the world receive their prenatal care in places like this, or in much worse places. I'm not special for having to do it." "Tamai, you are special," he replied without thinking. Sarah was silent, but he could see a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. When her name was finally called, Sarah stood up with the visible effort required at 7.5 months pregnant. "Can I come in with you?" Mark asked. "Are you sure? It can be intense." Tense, more sure than ever. Dr. Ramirez's office was small but clean, with an examination table that had seen better days and medical equipment that was functional but clearly not state-of-the-art. The doctor himself was a man in his 50s, with a warm smile and hands that trembled slightly, probably from too much caffeine and too little sleep. "Sarah, how are you feeling?" the doctor asked as he reviewed her file. "And who is your companion?" "This is Mark," Sarah replied. "He's going to be involved in the pregnancy." Dr. Ramirez looked at Mark curiously. "The father?" Sarah and Mark exchanged a quick glance. "It's complicated," Sarah finally replied. "Modern families are often complicated." Dr. Ramirez smiled. "The important thing is that the baby has people who love him." For the next 30 minutes, Mark watched fascinated as the doctor examined Sarah, listened to the baby's heartbeat, and took measurements that he wrote down in a file that seemed too thin to contain all the important medical information of a pregnancy. But what impressed him most was how Dr. Ramirez treated Sarah. Despite the chaotic environment of the clinic, despite being obviously rushed, he gave her his full attention, answered all her questions patiently, and treated her with the same respect he would have shown a private patient. "Everything looks good," the doctor finally announced. "The baby is growing normally, Your blood pressure is better than last time, and, according to my calculations, you have approximately 8 more weeks. 8 weeks? Mark repeated, and there was panic in his voice. First baby? Dr. Ramirez asked him with a knowing smile. In a sense, Mark admitted. Don't worry. 8 weeks is enough time to prepare, especially if Sarah has a good support system. As they left the clinic, Mark was unusually silent. Sarah noticed it as they headed for the car. Are you all right? She asked him. 8 weeks, Mark murmured. In 8 weeks, you're going to be a mother. Yes, Sarah replied simply. And if everything goes well between us, in 8 weeks, I'm going to be a father. Sarah stopped by the car, studying his expression. Are you panicking? Mark considered the question honestly. I should be panicking. A week ago, my biggest concern was whether I was going to close the Tokyo contract. Now I'm thinking about diapers and bottles, and how to properly hold a baby. And how do you feel about it? Mark looked her directly in the eyes. I feel more scared and more excited than I've ever felt in my entire life. Sarah smiled, the first completely genuine smile he had seen since they had reconnected. Good, she said, because being a parent shouldn't be easy. If it were easy, anyone could do it well. As they drove back to Sarah's apartment, Mark realized something fundamental. For the first time in his adult life, he was facing something he couldn't buy, manipulate, or control with his wealth and power. He was going to have to earn his place in this family day by day, decision by decision, moment by moment. And the idea, instead of terrifying him, filled him with a determination he had never felt before. This time, he was going to do it right, because Sarah and that baby deserved nothing less than his best. And he was determined to give it to them. What do you think of Mark's commitment? Do you believe he's truly ready for fatherhood? Share your thoughts. Mark woke up at 3:47 a.m., not to an alarm, but to the sound he had learned to recognize immediately. Sarah's short, sharp breaths in the bed beside him. In the last 3 weeks, since he had officially moved into her apartment, after discreetly renovating it to be more comfortable, he had developed an internal radar to detect any sign that labor might be starting. Are you okay? He murmured, softly turning on the night lamp. Sarah was sitting on the edge of the bed, one hand on her lower back, the other on her massive belly. At 39 weeks, she looked like she had swallowed a basketball, but to Mark, she had never been more beautiful. I think it's time, she whispered, and there was a mixture of excitement and pure terror in her voice. Mark sat up immediately, fully awake. Over the past few weeks, he had practiced this moment in his mind hundreds of times. He had read all the books about childbirth. He had taken prenatal classes with Sarah. He had packed and repacked the hospital bag 3 times. How long have you been feeling contractions? He asked, his voice calm even though his heart was racing like a Ferrari engine. Since midnight, Sarah admitted. I didn't want to wake you until I was sure. Sarah. Mark stood up and knelt in front of her, taking her hands. You promised me you'd wake me immediately when it started. We're in this together, remember? The last 2 months had been the most radical transformation of Mark's life. He had cut his work hours in half. He had learned to cook healthy meals for pregnant women. He had painted the baby's room with his own hands. And he had read more books on parenting than on business strategies. But more importantly, he had learned to be present. Truly present. Another contraction. Sarah gasped, squeezing his hands with a surprising force. Mark looked at his watch, timing the duration as they had practiced. 45 seconds. How long between this one and the last? About 5 minutes. Sarah breathed deeply as the contraction passed. It's time to go to the hospital, Mark declared. But Sarah stopped him when he stood up to get the keys. Mark, there's something I need to tell you before the baby is born. What is it? He sat back down in front of her, worried by the seriousness in her voice. During these 2 months, you've been the man I always dreamed you could be. You've been patient when I was hormonal and impossible. You've been there for every doctor's appointment, every midnight craving, every moment of panic. You've read more books about babies than I have. Tears began to roll down her cheeks. But I need you to know that what you did for me, what you sacrificed to be here, is more than I ever expected from anyone. Mark felt as if his heart would explode. Sarah, I didn't sacrifice anything. I gained everything. Another contraction, she whispered. And this time, Mark could see it was more intense. As he helped her breathe through the contraction, Mark realized something that filled him with such intense emotion he could barely breathe. In a few hours, he was going to meet his son. Because that's what the baby had come to mean to him. His son, regardless of biology. The trip to the hospital was a mixture of controlled panic and pure emotion. Sarah had contractions every 3 minutes now, and Mark drove with one hand while holding hers with the other. Do you remember what you said that night at the restaurant? Sarah asked during a pause between contractions. What specifically? I said a lot of stupid things that night. Sarah laughed despite the pain. You said you wanted the opportunity to be the father this baby deserved. And I meant it, Mark replied immediately. I know, and I want you to know that you already are. You've been his father from the moment you decided to stay. When they arrived at the hospital, everything became a blur of activity. Nurses, doctors, forms, rooms, beeping machines. But through all the chaos, Mark never let go of Sarah's hand. For the next 8 hours, he lived every contraction with her. He breathed through every moment of pain. He encouraged her when she was exhausted, and he became her anchor in the sea of intensity that is labor. I can see the head, the doctor shouted at 11:47 a.m. Sarah, with the next contraction, I need you to push with everything you've got. Mark looked where the doctor was pointing and saw something that changed him forever. The tiny head of his son, covered in dark hair, making his way into the world. Oh my God, he whispered, and there were tears running down his face. Sarah, I can see him. I can see our baby. Our baby? Sarah asked between gasps. Our baby, Mark confirmed without hesitation. Completely ours. With a final contraction that made Sarah scream with an intensity Mark had never heard, the baby fully emerged into the world. It's a boy, the doctor announced. Immediately, the room filled with the most beautiful sound Mark had ever heard, the strong, healthy cry of his son. Dad wants to cut the cord? The nurse asked, extending a pair of scissors toward Mark. For a moment, Mark froze. Dad? They were calling him Dad. Go, Sarah whispered, with a smile that was pure light. Cut your son's cord. With trembling hands, Mark cut the umbilical cord, officially separating his son from Sarah's body and making him an independent person. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, the nurse announced after weighing the baby. Completely healthy. When the baby was placed in his arms for the first time, Mark thought his heart would simply stop. The child was perfect. Tiny fingers that immediately gripped his, eyes that opened for a moment to look directly at him, and a face that was a perfect mixture of Sarah and, well, someone else. But that no longer mattered. Hello, little one, Mark murmured, his voice broken by emotion. I'm your dad. I've been waiting for you my whole life. Sarah, exhausted but radiant, extended her arms. Let me see him. Mark carefully placed the baby in Sarah's arms, and the image of the two of them together was something he knew he would remember for the rest of his life. He's perfect, Sarah whispered, examining every detail of her son's face. What are we going to name him? Over the past 2 months, they had discussed names dozens of times, but had never reached a final decision. How about Matthew? Mark suggested. It means gift of God. Sarah looked at the baby, then at Mark. Matthew Sterling. She tried the name. I like it. But what? Are you sure you want him to have your last name? Technically, Sarah. Mark interrupted her gently. There's nothing technical about this. I'm his father in every way that matters, and I want the whole world to know that this is my son. Tears streamed freely down Sarah's face now. You know what? You're right. Matthew Sterling sounds perfect. At that moment, as if he had understood they were talking about him, the baby opened his eyes and looked directly at Mark. And in those dark, innocent eyes, Mark saw his complete future. Sleepless nights and first steps, first words and soccer games, help with homework and conversations about life. He saw unconditional love, real purpose, and the opportunity to be the kind of father he himself had needed as a child. I love you, he told Sarah, leaning in to kiss her softly. Both of you, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. We love you too, Sarah whispered against his lips. Right, little one? We love Daddy. What a beautiful ending to this chapter. Share your favorite moment from the story in the comments. 6 months later, Mark was sitting on the living room floor of their new house. Not the mansion he had before, but a normal-sized family home in a safe but unostentatious neighborhood, with Matthew on his lap, reading him a book about farm animals. And this is a cat, Mark said, pointing to the image. Can you say cat? Matthew, now 6 months old, responded with a joyful gurgle that Mark chose to interpret as a perfectly pronounced cat. Sarah entered the living room, carrying 2 cups of coffee, and sat down next to them on the floor. She had returned to work part-time as an art teacher at a private school, a job Mark had helped her get, but which she had earned entirely on her own merit. How was your day? Mark asked her, putting an arm around her while still holding Matthew. Amazing, Sarah smiled. My students are working on a project about non-traditional families, and I couldn't help but think of us. Are we a non-traditional family? Completely, Sarah laughed. We have the millionaire who left his company to be a full-time dad, the art teacher who fell in love twice with the same man, and the baby who has the most devoted father in the world, despite not sharing his DNA. Mark looked at Matthew, who had grabbed the book and was trying to eat it. You know what? You're right. We're completely non-traditional, and I wouldn't change it for anything in the world. Not even for your old life of uncomplicated luxury? Especially not for that, Mark replied without hesitation. My old life was empty. I had everything money could buy, and nothing that truly mattered. Sarah snuggled closer to him. And what truly matters? Mark looked around their living room, which was a complete mess of baby toys, parenting books, and the small evidences of a life truly lived. He looked at Sarah, who had paint stains on her hands from her day's work and disheveled hair from chasing a 6-month-old. He looked at Matthew, who was now happily drooling on the animal book. This, he said simply, this chaotic, imperfect, completely unpredictable life, this family we built together, this love that is more real than anything I've ever felt before. Even when Matthew wakes us up every 2 hours, Sarah joked. Especially then, Mark laughed. Because those 2 a.m. moments when he cries, and we get up together to calm him, when we work as a team to take care of him, those are the moments when I feel most alive. Sarah stood up and extended her arms towards Matthew. Come here, little one. It's time for your dinner. As Sarah fed Matthew, Mark watched them with a sense of gratitude so intense it almost overwhelmed him. 3 years ago, he had been the richest and most miserable man in the country. He had had everything he thought he wanted, and nothing he truly needed. Now he technically had less money. He had sold most of his properties and put most of his fortune in trusts for Matthew and charities. Less business power. He had delegated most of his company's daily operations, and definitely less free time. But he was infinitely richer in all the ways that mattered. What are you thinking about? Sarah asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. I'm thinking, Mark replied, about how close I came to losing all of this a second time. What do you mean? That night at the restaurant, When I saw you for the first time in 3 years, I had the option to just leave. I could have pretended I hadn't recognized you. I could have paid my bill and walked out of your life forever. Sarah froze. You considered doing that? For about 2 seconds, Mark admitted. My first instinct was to run, because seeing you immediately made me realize how empty my life had been without you. And what made you stay? Mark smiled, remembering that moment that had changed everything. I saw you holding your back because it hurt. And I realized that no matter how uncomfortable it made me feel to see you, I couldn't leave, knowing you were struggling alone. You didn't even know about David then. No, but I knew something was wrong. And more than that, I knew I still loved you. I had spent 3 years lying to myself about that. But the moment I saw you, I knew I had never stopped loving you. Sarah finished feeding Matthew and put him over her shoulder to burp him. You know what's the craziest thing about all this? What? That David abandoning me was the best thing that could have happened to me. Mark looked at her in surprise. How can you say that? Because if he hadn't abandoned me, I would never have been working in that restaurant that night. I would never have seen you again. We would never have had this second chance. Sarah walked toward Mark and sat on his lap, with Matthew asleep in her arms. And more importantly, she continued, if he hadn't abandoned me, I would never have learned that I can survive alone. When we first got married, I was dependent on you for everything. I needed you to be my salvation. And now? Now I know I can take care of myself and Matthew if necessary, which means I'm with you because I want to be with you, not because I need to be with you. And that makes our love much stronger. Mark kissed her softly, being careful not to wake Matthew. I love you, Sarah. You and this little miracle. More than words can express. We love you too, Sarah whispered against his lips. Forever. As the sun set through the windows of their living room, painting everything in golden tones, Mark realized he had found something he had been searching for his whole life without even knowing it. Real purpose, unconditional love, and the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you are exactly where you are supposed to be. He had spent decades chasing business success, accumulating wealth, building an empire that would impress the world. But it turns out that true wealth was not measured in numbers in a bank account. It was measured in moments like this. A baby asleep in the arms of the woman he loved, in a house full of laughter and love, knowing that tomorrow he would wake up to do it all again. And for the first time in his life, Mark Sterling was truly rich. Thank you for reading. If this story touched your heart, please share it with your friends and family. Your support means the world to us.